All saddle stitched. This is also saddle stitched. This is the very first bag I ever made. Made it as a gift for Charlene, Valentine's Day 2013. That's some messy stitching. In fact, wait here, let me go and get something. That's all I had to stitch this bag, and it was blunt. First travel bag I ever made. Saddle stitched. So I made this bag several years ago for Charlene when she went into hospital to give birth to our son Noah. The whole bag has been saddle stitched. A couple thousand stitches in this bag. So as you can see, some of my most treasured memories are literally tied together with the saddle stitch. So today we're going to be looking at what goes into the saddle stitch, the tools, the thread, how to get a clean looking stitch on the front end and the back end of your stitching. And if I'm going to be showing you stitching, I'm going to be making something. So I'm going to make another one of these, one of my favorite designs. Let's get this started. So there are loads of different ways to hand stitch leather and make holes in your leather. My preferred method is using something called a pricking iron. This gives that classic angled look to your stitch. So just a quick tip while I'm busy marking this piece of leather over here. When I'm stitching thicker leathers like this wallet that I'm doing now, I'll put my stitch 4 millimeters from the edge. And when I'm working with those more, let's call them more refined leathers, like your chev leathers and so forth, I will stitch that 3 millimeters from the edge. So the way I start off any little bit of stitching and get that hole even is by just putting that top tooth on top of the item, and then I'll just let that second tooth just mark down. So I know that there's my starting point. And that's where I'll put my first hole. So while I'm busy marking this leather over here, I have seen a lot of guys trying to mark their leather in a horizontal fashion. Now, don't do that. Our eyes don't look like it. I think all of us look better when we're looking down the line. So when you're marking any of your pieces of leather, do it in a way that you're actually looking down. So I'm busy working up to this top corner over here, and I think that a lot of guys battle with getting their stitches even at this point. So what I like to do when I coming up to any sort of a line like this, I'll just let that, I won't knock through, but I'll let that and make sure that my holes are actually going to come up to where it needs to come up to. Just a quick recap, just before I start stitching this wallet together. I've used an 8 SPR pricking iron, which has marked the holes. I'm now going to use a 004 John James needle. I only use two sizes of needles, guys. I either use the 004 or I use the 002. So those are only two sizes of needles that I use. The 004 is actually a smaller needle, as you'll see, slightly smaller than, or at least a couple of mils smaller than the other one, and it just allows for a finer thread. Right, so the next thing we're going to need to cover is what size thread do we need to use when we're using an 8 SPI pricking iron. Now obviously this comes down to personal preference, whether you like a thick heavy looking stitch or you like a thinner lighter weight looking stitch. So the threads that I like to use for this size stitch would either be, in the lin cable thread at least, would be a 432 or a 532. The 432 gives a little bit of a heavier looking, chunkier looking stitch, and the 532 a little bit more of a delicate look. And then I'll use the twist brand of threads, and this comes in a 0.55 mil thread. This is the one that I'm actually going to be using for this project now. I really like the way this thread stitches. It's a poly thread, so I know that it's never going to perish. I don't have to wax it. It just makes it much easier for me to get the project done a lot quicker. So I want to be using this for today's project. So a quick little tip, often these threads battle to get through the eye of the needle. So what I've done is, and what I like to do is I just use my scarving knife and I'll literally just snip through it, which gives me a nice angle on the end of that thread. And then I can just take a little bit of beeswax and just hold down that fray. So what that's given me now is a nice flat area for that thread to go through the needle. Pull that wax off. And there you can see it pops through nice and easily through the eye of that needle. And then the way I like to thread my needle is I'll take a length of thread through the end of the needle, about double the size of the needle. Stick the end of the needle through the center of your thread. That creates quite a large loop as I push that front piece back. And then I'll just pull through the back until I have a little loop, and then use my finger just to pull that top piece over the bottom piece. And that's it, done. This gives a very, very secure loop for stitching. So just a quick tip to start your stitching off correctly. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that your thread is nice and even. So the way that you do that is you obviously just put your needles together. I like to do it once I've already pulled my first thread through and make sure. I've already obviously checked it at this point, but I'll make sure that my thread is nice and even. So I can hold back and I'll double up. And there it is, nice and even. So there's a couple of things that you guys are going to see going on here that really helped me transition from when I first started leatherwork many years ago to getting very, very clean stitching and consistent clean stitching. And that is, when I first started, I actually used to stitch forward, and you'll see now I stitch towards myself. Now the biggest difference with that is I get a consistent pull, because I know a lot of guys battle. They say, oh, I'm getting a great stitch on the front end, but the back side of my stitching is not great. So this is one of those things that actually really help you get that back stitch nice and consistent. I found it was a big thing, obviously moving towards me. The other thing is you'll see me stitching with a saddler's awl. Now there is a video on my channel of making this thing. You can make yourself one as well. I personally prefer stitching with a saddler's awl. So you'll notice while I'm using my awl over here, I'm not looking at the hole on the back side of the leather. I found this is one of those things that really got me to speed up my leather work. And it does take practice, lots and lots of practice of obviously getting that right and getting the confidence to get that right. But especially like doing a product like I'm doing now, where the leather is folded over itself, if I was consistently looking at that back stitch, I would have to be lifting my head back and forth in this crazy position, and it actually becomes quite painful for the neck after a period of time. So that's another quick hint on getting that right. Also, while I'm busy with my awl over here, one of those things that you really want to practice is just that same motion of getting your awl to go in at the same angle every single time. You know, and that's another thing that will just take a little bit of time, but very rewarding. You know, once you've got this motion right and you start getting confident you're stitching, it's a very rewarding, I don't know, activity, I guess. Now, something else you may be noticing as I'm stitching over here is that I have a very precise and specific way that I pull that thread. So I'm pulling my right hand, I stitch right-handed, a little bit towards myself, and my left hand is actually going upward slightly. Now, I'm actually stitching on a traditional saddler's clamp, but if you're stitching on a stitching pony where you're in a more vertical position, so if that thing was vertical up on you, you'd have to be pulling down and to the right with your right arm and upward and outward with your left arm. Obviously, if you're stitching right-handed, if you're stitching left-handed, that would just be in reverse. So this is one of the benefits, I think, personally, of stitching on a traditional clamp. I get to stitch keeping my arms almost in a parallel position. So instead of having to pull this left arm up at quite an angle to get this angled stitch, the angle of the clamp does that all automatically for me. So when that needle from the left-hand side, my left-hand needle comes through the hole, I will put the right-handed needle in front. So I'm just going to put it in front of that. Let me take this up here a little bit. So I'm going to put that here in front. And then obviously just pull that through. So I've got a cross that is going towards that front needle. And because of the angle of the hole, if you see the angles of the hole that happens with the pricking iron, I've got a section that is angling upward. So I'm going to pull that thread towards me. It's obviously over-exaggerating it. And I'm going to take that needle that was in my right hand that's sitting in front of that needle now, and I'm just going to push it through the top of that hole. And when it comes through onto the back side, as it comes through onto the back side there, I'm going to do what's called casting that stitch. So I'm going to take that thread and put it over the needle. So I'm putting it over the needle. And then I'm going to pull that through. Now, do you need to cast the needle like I do on the back end over there? Probably not. I find it gives me a nicer angle on the back side as well as the front side. Okay, so one more time over here. That left needle comes through. The needle from the right hand side goes in front of that needle. I'm going to pull through. I have a cross now in my hand. And that needle is going to go through the top end of that hole, and on the back side I'm going to take that thread and just put it over that needle, cast it over so it comes through its own loop on that side, and then I'll just pull and finish off that thread. That's my back stitching, or the back side of my stitching. Probably could be a little bit neater, but that's okay. If you've been stitching for any given time, you've caught a thread before. So when your needle goes through, you catch a thread, you pull your stitch through, and you've got a problem because it's not pulling tight. So one of the things that I do is, as I push that needle through, if you look here on the back side, so as that needle's coming through, before I cast it, I give that thread a little tug back towards. And I do it all in one motion, so I pull and put it over. So I'm going to do it one more time. So this just stops that thread from being caught. And I'll do this in a single motion. So as that needle comes through, and I push the next one forward, just as I'm about to cast that thread, so while that needle's coming forward, I'm pulling this thread back towards me. Pulling that thread, and then I'll put it over at the same movement. And that way you'll never ever catch a thread. And if you do, so let me push one through here. So if you do happen to catch a thread, which I probably won't be able to do now, as you're pulling back, it's going to pull off of the needle. So as I'm pulling back, it's going to pull right off if you've caught it. And that will save you a lot of headaches in the future. It takes a little bit of practice to get that rhythm right. So as I'm stitching over here, I'm just going to show you that rhythm while I'm going. So it's happening so quick that it doesn't actually slow down my stitching at all. But I'll tell you what, when you catch a thread, it can take having to unpick and uncut and join. And so it's actually just a simple one movement motion, and I'm coming through. As I'm about to get to the corner here, this is where a lot of beginners and intermediate hand stitchers start to find difficulty, where they throw their stitches on the corner. The easiest way to resolve that is to turn your item so that the stitch is always facing the same way. So basically there I'm stitching in a certain position straight, and I'm going to turn that corner stitch now so that the hole is exactly the same as if that was a straight stitch coming straight towards me. And that's going to give me a stitch that'll fall, and I keep just turning that product to allow it to fall into the exact same position it would if I was stitching straight. So as I come past that corner, you'll see now that the stitching has got a nice even look to it. And that's simply just moving the product around in the clamp to keep your pull consistent. Alright, so I finished my last stitch coming towards me, and the way to finish off this saddle stitch now is to take several stitches back on themselves. It's called a back stitch. So what I like to do, well, the easiest way I like to do it is, if I take that needle from this side, I'll go underneath the thread. So I just want to move that up there. So I'll go in at the bottom of the hole, underneath the thread on the front end. I'm going to do this one needle at a time just to show you how I do it. Let me take that up there. Making sure that I haven't caught the thread coming through on the back end. If I have caught that thread coming through on the back end, I'll obviously reposition, take that needle out, and make sure that I'm under the thread on that side as well. And then obviously just pull through. So now I can see, if you see that needle, that thread coming through, it's actually below the, so there the two will sit nicely next to each other. Now I'm going to finish off going 3. I like to always finish off with 3 back stitches, but 1 will be strong enough, especially on an item like this where it's going to have low wear and tear. Alright, so we've stitched up the card pockets, and I'm going to be stitching the main body of this card wallet together. But something I do whenever I have 2 pieces of leather that are glued together, and this is of utmost importance to get good looking stitching on both the front side and the back side, and I've already been doing this a little bit, and that's to get your edges as absolutely clean as possible and even. So what I'm doing here is also when I'm looking down the edge, I'm making sure that the edge, or one of the edges, is not leaning to the side, because what happens then is you get stitches that are lopsided as well. So I'm making sure, looking down the edge, and I do this with every product that I make. So I look down that edge, make sure that the edge is straight. If it's not, I'll come back in with my knife and I'll just even it out that little bit more. And this will get you a much better looking stitch on both the front side and the back side. So I'm just about to start marking with a pricking iron now, marking my holes to stitch. And one of the things I just want to point out here quickly is, if I was going to mark that piece of leather there now, I've got an incredible rock in that leather because of the pocket on the back end. So what I do is, no matter what I'm making, I get the item as flat as I can, the edge that I'm stitching as flat as I can before I mark it. Because now, when I come down to mark that item, I can hold and hit with it going straight down versus the iron having to move and adjust as the leather wiggles underneath. Quick note, I hit the pricking iron with the exact same force whether I was hitting 1 mil thick leather or 3 mil thick leather. My hits I like to hit, it goes around about a depth of 2 millimeters with these irons that I use, and that'll be consistent on no matter what product that I'm using. So if I'm using thinner leathers, it will often go through. If I'm using thicker leathers, it won't go through. So while I'm busy stitching over here, I thought I'd show you an exercise that I used to do because I wanted to get really proficient using a saddler's awl. So literally what I would do is take a small piece of scrap leather, mark my pricking iron on the front end with a line coming 10 mils down, and then on the back end just have a pen line with the same distance, in other words 10 mils down again. 10 mils on the front where my marks are, 10 mils down, and then I would obviously just mount that again. And then what I would do is come back and see how far I am from the line. So you can see I'm obviously on the line with those 3 that I stuck through. So I hope you found some value in this video on how to saddle stitch, or at least the techniques that have helped me improve my stitching over the years, and I hope it helps you improve your techniques. And if you like the look of this card wallet, I have made a PDF version of the pattern available, which also includes a lot more detailed photos of the how-to construction of this, so you can find the link to that below. And if you have found some value out of this video, please remember to hit the like button below. Remember to subscribe to the channel, because I will be adding a lot more videos like this to the channel with techniques and little tips and tricks that have helped me along the years of leather crafting. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video.